Good morning. Today we look at Matthew 15, verses 1 through 20. And this is another one of the times when Jesus has a run-in with the religious leaders. The Pharisees and the scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem. So they traveled. They came from Jerusalem. And it wasn't that Jesus was there, but they came from Jerusalem and asked this question. Why do your disciples break the traditions of the elders? They don't wash their hands before they eat. And how picky? Doesn't that sound like a picky question? Just they're nitpicking things apart. And this is what they do. They're watching Jesus with a magnifying glass. Checking out with a fine-tooth comb, or a lot of those different expressions that they're very carefully and diligently observing, and not only observing themselves, but having others watch. But so they're not washing properly before they have a meal, and they're not following the traditions of the elders. And of course, the traditions of the elders came because of the laws, but over time, had maybe gotten a little bit off base, maybe, who knows? But because it's just like, somebody does something because, well, that's the way mom did it. Mom did it that way because grandma did it. And grandma did that because great-grandma did it. And the traditions that maybe over time change a little bit and get away from their true meaning. And I truly think that this is what happened with much of Jewish law and everything, because Jesus calls them out and he says, why do you break the commandment of God for your traditions? And he quotes, the fourth commandment, honor your father and your mother. Because the traditions of the elders and of the church, they weren't taking care of these elderly people. They were, taking advantage of them, if nothing else. And he says, so he quotes, the fourth commandment, honor your father and your mother. That's Exodus and Deuteronomy have the 10 commandments. And then, whoever speaks evil of father or mother must surely die. I don't know for sure if that's in Leviticus or Deuteronomy, but, it's, you badmouth your mom or your dad, then you should die. This is pretty serious stuff, but, it's a way that God was trying to get the people to understand, to value our elders, to take care of our elders, and not to say, well, they don't matter anymore, and we're going to do things different now. And so then right away here, well, you're the tradition of the elders, but then, you're not going to listen to your elders. And so it's one of those questions that doesn't have a great answer in so many ways. But the Pharisees, the church, they weren't following the word of God. They weren't following the 10 commandments. They had, kind of maybe expanded them or given them some gray areas and different things that way. And so Jesus goes on and he says, it's not if you wash your hands or not. It's not if you wash your feet or not when you come in. It's not about your exterior and that cleanliness. What defiles a person, what makes you unclean in the eyes of God, is what comes out of you. He talks about, what you eat, goes through your body and goes out into the sewer. That's a kind of a polite way of saying it, but it is, what we eat doesn't form who we are, doesn't shape who we are. Well, they shape us. If we eat the wrong things, we get out of shape, but what we eat isn't the critical thing, but what comes out of our hearts, that comes out of our mouths. And I remember reading one time when a person was using quite vile language, to put it bluntly. Someone says, so you eat with that same dirty mouth? But it's, not what's coming out. Not what's going in, but it's what comes out. And so if you are speaking lies, if you are doing all of the wrong things that way, if you're not taking care of the things you should be taking care of, this is what is wrong with society. And so it's, and then he calls them hypocrites, and in so many ways it's because of their misguided traditions, that had come down incorrectly so many times. And it's, when we're looking at, we can read what we want to some ways out of the Bible. It is just like these last few verses we look at today, verse 19, for out of the heart comes evil intentions, murder, adultery, fornications, or sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person. But if we say that these are the only things that defile a person, well, then we're not being right either. There's another list in the Gospel of Mark of things that Jesus calls sin. But, within that list, murder's not in there. So does that automatically say, well, that, so we have to kind of be careful a little bit as to just say, well, this is what Jesus said. So, this is, no, that doesn't make it okay. Jesus says, in another place, he says, I came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. The law is still the law. And so a lot of what the Pharisees were doing, a lot of what the church was teaching, maybe didn't quite line up with what God really intended. And so this is what Jesus is talking about. He says, and this is what he says about, those religious leaders. He said, let them alone. They are blind guides of the blind. And if the blind person is leading another blind person, they're both going to follow into a pit. So if you are, it's like peer pressure. You're hanging out with this group of people and you know that what they're doing isn't right, but yet because everybody's doing it, you go along with it. This is what Jesus is saying here, to hang out with somebody that's blind to the law, to hang out with somebody that is blind to doing the right thing, you're going to do that same wrong thing, that way. And then, it's verse 12 when he says, do you not see that whatever goes into the mouth enters the stomach and goes into the sewer? And it is, but we got to be careful what goes into our minds, what gets into our minds and into our hearts and into the way we live our lives, because that's what's wrong with so much of society is that we get so caught up in this and this that so-and-so is doing, and these influencers we have, and I've mentioned them before. Some of them are probably okay. I don't know all of the influencers, but, we need to watch out who our heroes are, who the people are that we want to be like. When you're growing up, you want to become this, and so hopefully we have good examples of people to want to grow up like that way. But it's still, we gotta, we gotta remember that it's not what we eat, and it's not all of what we hear and what we read, but it's what we let reside within our minds. And it's so to have this love of God in our hearts and in our minds, and it's our minds that think, it's our minds that reason, it's our minds that have all of these things. But you say, I love you with all my heart. Well, your heart doesn't really feel that. It's in your mind. But what's in our mind affects the whole body. And it affects the whole persona of who we are. And this is what Jesus is talking about. It isn't just a little thing here and there, but it's the whole of who we are. And to have the whole of who we are shaped and formed and influenced by the Word of God, and the correct usage, the correct looking at the Word of God. And so it's like I said with this, verse 19, where it talks about, for out of the heart comes these evil intentions and all of this sin. We can't just limit those wrong things to what Jesus says in one spot or the other. It's just like, if your parents give you a couple rules and you know that there are other rules, and just because they didn't remind you of that doesn't mean that doesn't have any bearing anymore. So Jesus kind of calls the Pharisees out, even though they're calling him out on, you're not following tradition. And if the tradition is taking you away from where you should be, taking you away of how you should treat others and remind you of how you really should live, then those traditions need to change. And this is what Jesus is saying, that, you're so careful and so cautious of these things, but you're forgetting what's most important. And so what's most important is to know God, to love God, and to let that love